I'm Mel Cooper. One of Verdi's most popular operas, it's been popular since the day it was first performed and it's never fallen out of popularity, is of course La Traviata. The story is based on something that vaguely really happened to Alexandre Dumas fils. He wrote the novel. The novel was turned into a play. Verdi saw the play with Giuseppina Strepponi, the woman with whom he was living. And I think probably that this opera is one of his most personal reactions to literature because it so mirrored his own life story. When he took Giuseppina back to his farm in Italy and tried to introduce her to his father-in-law from the marriage to the woman who had died with his two children, this man, who had been so important in Verdi's life, was horrified because, of course, Giuseppina was herself a Traviata. She was out of the normal society. And Verdi said to his father-in-law, "This is my woman. If you will not meet her, I can never speak to you again," which was a huge thing for him because this man had been his mentor from the time he was a young kid. This is the man whose daughter he had started teaching the piano to. They'd fallen in love. He'd given permission for them to marry, even though Verdi at the time was a penniless composer. And so this was such an important personal thing. And of course, the very next day, the father-in-law turned up, knocked on the door, and introduced himself to Giuseppina, and they became very, very good friends, in fact. And indeed, years later, when Verdi was hesitating, it was the father-in-law who got Verdi to marry Giuseppina. So you can imagine them sitting there and singing the play in Paris when it was first done. It was a huge success, and Verdi immediately wanted to set it as an opera. When the curtain goes up on the opera, there's a huge party in progress, and Violetta is giving this party. She's the courtesan, she's the person who's living with a very rich man, or being supported by him at any rate, and all her friends are there. And within a few moments, she's introduced to a young man named Alfredo, and she's told that Alfredo has been in love with her from the day that he saw her, and that when she was very ill recently, we know with tuberculosis, he stood outside her window, he sent flowers every day. And she's amazed by this, and she turns to the Duke and says to him, "You know, how come you didn't send me flowers every day?" And he says, "Well, I've only known you a year." And she says, "This man didn't know me at all. We hadn't even met." And then everyone asks for a drinking song, and there's the famous Brindisi, where the two of them are obviously flirting with each other like crazy and have a very strong sexual attraction. The party continues. The people go off to dance. Violetta has a coughing fit as they're going into the other room. She stays behind, and Alfredo arrives to declare his love to her. And they sing this fantastically famous duet. And he sings the phrase, "Oh, quell'amor che palpito dell'universo intero." And this music is going to be used again and again to remind us of this moment and of the sincerity of their love. She's very flippant with him, and she says, "Well, if you're really saying that you love me, you better flee because I'm trouble." But he won't, he says. So finally she says to him, "Okay, come back to me." She gives him a flower, probably a camellia, and says, "Come back to me." And he says, "When?" And she says, "When the flower has faded." And he says, "Oh my God, that's tomorrow." And she says, "Yes, it's tomorrow." And so he runs off happy. The rest of the party decides to go on to the next party, so they go, and she's left alone. At this point, Verdi does something really interesting. It was usual in opera at this time to have what was called an aria and a cabaletta to introduce a character. We've been through almost the whole of the first act, and you haven't had that sequence yet. Suddenly, Violetta is left alone. She's thinking about what's happened, and she gets her aria and cabaletta. First saying, "Is it possible? Could he really be in love with me? Is this actually what I've been looking for all my life?" Then dismissing it because she absolutely can't believe that this could happen to her. And she sings the famous cabaletta, "Sempre libera," "I will always be free. I will throw myself into the vortex they call Paris, and I will die that way." And that's the end of Act 1. Act 2 starts after there's been a lapse, and in fact, Violetta and Alfredo have eloped, and they are now living in the country. And Alfredo knows that she's been getting mysterious letters and something has been happening and he's not sure what's going on. But at the same time, he's very, very happy with her. And when he discovers that she's selling her stuff to fund them, he rushes off to try to do something about it. She thinks some guy is coming to buy some more stuff from her. And while Alfredo's out, this man arrives, only it turns out to be Alfredo's father. And this is the crux of the opera. This is the scene where the father confronts Violetta as if she's a fallen woman. He is impressed by her dignity. He slowly shifts and clearly comes to realize that she's a very considerable character of real integrity, but he still begs her to let Alfredo go. He's got a daughter who needs to get married. The scandal's going to be too much. It'll ruin the relationship with the young man she's going to marry. Violetta at first says, okay, he can go for a while and we'll sort that out. And the father says, no, I mean forever. And then he really pulls out the emotional stops in a very famous aria. It's the blackmail aria, I call it, because he tells her, one day your beauty's going to fade, you won't be married to him, he'll just leave you anyway, and you'll have ruined his life, you'll have ruined his chances in business and society and all the rest of it. Violetta's convinced, and she says, okay, I will leave him, I give in to him, my love is so strong for him that I don't want to ruin his life. But she kind of, there's this moment when she's kind of saying, do I really have to the old guy? And the old guy, despite this shift that he's had in attitude towards her, says, yes, you do have to. He cannot get over the conventions. So Violetta says, okay, I'll go. And he says, what are you going to do? And she says, if I told you, you would stop me. And he doesn't want to know. He just says, okay, fine, do whatever you have to do. And he goes. So Alfredo, she writes a letter in tears. Alfredo comes back. She tells him she's leaving. And she sings this great outburst of, love me, Alfredo, love me, whatever happens. And rushes out to Paris, he thinks, to sell some stuff. The father then comes in. Alfredo reads the letter and thinks that she's left him. Well, she has. She's left him for going back to the guy that was keeping her in the first place, but he doesn't know why. And the old man is horrified and sings his great aria about going back to Provence and everything. And Alfredo says, no, this letter, I know where she's going. She's going to this party tonight, and he rushes off. So the next scene is a big party given by her friend Flora. And this is the scene where everybody's singing and dancing and, they're going to gamble, they're going to do whatever. And Alfredo arrives. He tries to confront her. He gambles with her lover. He wins, lucky at cards, unlucky in love. And then when everyone's gone off into the next room to dance, he confronts her again and he throws the money at her and says, this is all you were after in the first place. She collapses. Everyone rushes in and says, oh, you've been a horrible person. You're not a gentleman. There's a great outcry. Some unbelievably beautiful music, a great concerted passage. And the two men agree that they're going to fight a duel. Curtain. The final act is months later. Violetta is dying of tuberculosis and obviously from a broken heart. And she's received a letter from the father of Alfredo saying he's finally told Alfredo what really happened. He himself is full of regret, and they are rushing to Paris to seek her forgiveness. And she sings this great aria about how it's all too late and it is not possible for them to get there on time. And we know that she is dying, but in fact they do arrive just in the nick of time. There's a great reconciliation between Alfredo and Violetta where they sing about how they're going to leave Paris and go back to the country and live the life they've always wanted to live. The old man asks for her forgiveness. Everything seems to be going well, and then suddenly she has one of those moments that tubercular people often get where everything seems fine, and she collapses and dies, and that's the end of the opera. The Verdi opera of the story is probably still the most famous and the best known version. But don't forget, there's the original novel, La Dame aux Camélias. There's a play, La Dame aux Camélias, which got adapted by the author. And then there was a very famous series of films of it, both the silent era and, of course, in the talkie period, Greta Garbo's movie, Camille, which uses some of the music of Verdi in the second half of the film. You must see that. It's a great appendage to the opera. There's been a wonderful ballet of it called Marguerite and Armand, and there have been several other versions of the tale told. But if there's one that you really should get hold of, aside from reading the original novel, which is quite an interesting thing in terms of the differences to the opera, you should see Greta Garbo as Camille, with Robert Taylor, who Greta Garbo complained was more beautiful than she was.